Inside a small diner, bathed in sunlight and filled with the low hum of conversation, a young black woman did the unthinkable. She stood up, facing two police officers, all to protect a stranger in a worn black leather jacket with the unmistakable Hell's Angels emblem across his back. The whole town fell silent and then turned its back on her. But what happened next? That's what brought the entire town to tears. Have you ever wondered what could drive someone to sacrifice their reputation, safety, even their future, just to protect a complete stranger? Let me take you into the journey of Naomi Carter. A journey not just filled with trials, but one that reveals the quiet power hidden beneath what the world sees as fragile. Naomi Carter, owner of the small family diner that bears her name, was scrubbing the time-worn wooden tabletop for the third time that morning. The skin on her hands was red and dry, marked by the weight of days spent holding everything together. Rush hour meant 4 weary farmers and 2 truckers, and after that silence returned. Only the ceiling fan creaked overhead in the heavy southern summer air, a kind of stillness that wasn't peaceful at all. Naomi glanced at the battered cash register, mentally calculating the meager total inside. Each ding of the machine seemed to tighten the knot in her chest. That money, it wouldn't cover the overdue electric bill tucked inside her purse, where the red-lettered notice stabbed at reality like a paper cut. And it certainly wasn't enough to pay for her father's long list of medications. He'd been bedridden since the stroke. Just a few more months, Naomi whispered, brushing a damp curl from her forehead. It was the empty promise she'd been repeating to herself since the day she packed up her life in Atlanta and came back here, to Willow Creek, a town slowly withering away. Outside the window, the town's main road stretched eerily quiet, not the peace of a sleepy town, but the silence of a place that had once lived, once breathed, and now only stood as a shadow. Dusty windows, broken signs, and abandoned dreams. First the factory closed, then the hardware store, now Carter's diner. The legacy of a lifetime was bleeding out like a slow wound, and Naomi was the only one left trying to stop the bleeding. Have you ever felt like you're rowing alone in a vast ocean, knowing a storm is coming but still unable to stop paddling? Then the familiar jingle of the front bell broke the quiet, a sound her father used to love, now just a painful memory. Naomi turned, cleaning cloth still in hand, and froze. A man stood in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, nearly blocking the sunlight behind him. His black leather jacket was dusty, torn in places, like it had seen thousands of miles. His beard was thick with streaks of gray, and tattoos snaked down both arms, stories Naomi dared not guess. But what made the whole room seem to hold its breath was the patch on the back of his jacket. The Grim Reaper, clutching a scythe, the unmistakable symbol of the Hell's Angels. A shiver rippled through the diner. Mrs. Worthington, sitting by the window with her crossword, instinctively clutched her pearl necklace. Joe Larkin, a farmer Naomi had known since childhood, set his coffee cup down with a nervous clink that echoed louder than it should have. Even the old radio on the counter crackled with static, like the whole diner was holding its breath. The man stepped inside, his heavy boots thudding against the linoleum floor. Slow, deliberate, like a war drum. He chose the booth farthest from everyone else, shoulders hunched as if trying to fold himself into the air. A ghost in black, carrying something quiet and broken. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, a memory rising like smoke. Money spends the same at Carter's. Naomi gripped her apron tightly, her heart pounding hard enough to split her chest. Still she forced her voice to stay even, pressing herself into the rhythm of hospitality, the same one she offered every customer. She picked up a cloudy plastic menu, poured a glass of water, and walked toward the man in silence. "Welcome to Carter's," Naomi said, a soft smile on her lips, though every cell in her body was taut with tension. "Today's special is country fried steak with mashed potatoes. Made it fresh this morning." The man looked up. Naomi held her breath. His eyes, pale blue, rimmed red like they hadn't closed in days, were a sharp contrast to his rugged, time-worn face. These weren't the eyes of someone looking for trouble. They were the eyes of someone losing a battle. "Coffee?" he said, voice low and rough like gravel grinding under stone. "Black. Whatever's fastest from the kitchen. I've been driving since before sunrise." Naomi poured from the chipped old pot. She noticed his hands, large, calloused, weathered by labor, but they trembled slightly as he reached for the cup. Under his worn sleeve, a white plastic wristband peeked out. A hospital band. Her chest tightened. Naomi had seen that look before. Too many times, during her shifts in the oncology ward. The look of someone holding on to the thinnest thread of hope. "You heading much farther?" she asked, steadying her voice as she set down the cup. The man nodded slowly. "Back to Willow Creek Hospital." His voice caught, thick with something he couldn't swallow. "My daughter." He went silent, each word shattered like ice cracking under the weight of grief. He stared down into the swirling black coffee. Naomi swallowed the lump rising in her throat. She didn't ask anything else, just offered a quiet smile. "About some toast and eggs, just 6 minutes, tops." As she turned into the kitchen, Naomi glanced around the diner. Eyes were glued to her back, suspicious, judgmental, afraid. She knew there would be a price to pay, not just through looks, but in things deeper, reputation, trust, and sometimes even the survival of the diner itself. But she also knew what was right. And Naomi Carter had never been the kind of person to turn away from what was right. The bell above the door chimed again. This time it wasn't gentle, it was sharp, cold, like a knife slicing through the tension that had just begun to settle. She didn't need to look to know who had walked in. The air thickened, dense like smoke. Mrs. Worthington drew herself closer to her coffee. Joe Larkin scraped his chair across the tile floor with an awkward screech. 2 officers, Dean Harper and Laura Miles, had stepped inside. Both were in uniform, badges glinting under the dusty sunlight. Dean strode to the counter with the swagger of a man who knew the town bent beneath the sound of his boots. His eyes locked instantly on the man sipping coffee. And then Naomi saw it, the slow, cruel smile creeping across Dean's face. "Well, well, look what we have here," Dean said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "This town doesn't take kindly to your kind," he added with a sneer, voice dripping with contempt like a blade sliding across skin. The man didn't look up. He took a measured sip of his coffee, trying to steady his hand. Naomi gripped the counter tighter, her face flushing hot, as if the whole diner were staring straight through her. "Just here for some breakfast, officer," the man replied in a low, hoarse voice. Tired but respectful. Laura, the younger officer trailing behind Dean, said nothing, but her posture was stiff. Her eyes flicked between Naomi and the stranger, full of uncertainty. Dean leaned an elbow on the counter, a deliberate invasion of Naomi's space. "Maybe we should check his ID, Naomi. See if he's one of those reapers the department's looking for." Naomi's heart thudded. This man, he hadn't done anything wrong, nothing. But Dean had begun circling like a vulture that had spotted its prey. The man slowly reached into his jacket pocket. A careful movement, but Dean immediately moved his hand to the grip of his holstered weapon. Naomi stepped forward, her voice sharp, firmer than she'd intended. "He's a customer. Came in, paid like anyone else." Dean turned to her, that smirk spreading wider. "Customer, huh? You see that patch on his back?" He jerked his chin toward the reaper stitched onto the leather jacket. "You know what that stands for, Naomi? Drugs, guns, trouble." Finally, the man lifted his eyes, that pale blue gaze locked onto Dean's. Calm, but unyielding. "You don't know a damn thing about me," he said, voice low as rolling thunder. Dean let out a short, humorless laugh. "I know enough. Enough not to trust a man wearing death on his back." Naomi began to shake. Her hand trembled on the counter, pulse matching the staccato of her breath. She could feel every set of eyes in the diner locked on her. Some begged her not to stir the pot. Others waited to see whether she'd fold or stand tall. She thought of her father, of the words he once taught her, not spoken since the stroke, but deeply etched in a heart full of belief. Never judge someone by how they look. Watch what they do. Naomi swallowed hard, pushing through the fear coiled in her chest. You don't get to treat someone like a threat just because of how they look, she said, voice even, unwavering, though the fear was still there, knotted inside her. Dean straightened, eyes cold as ice. You're making a mistake, Naomi, he said, low and clear, a warning wrapped in steel. This town doesn't do well with people who stand up for trouble. The man pushed his plate aside and reached for his wallet, but Naomi placed her hand firmly on the counter, between him and the money. Today, you don't owe a thing, she said, steady. Breakfast is on me. The man froze, his eyes flickered, something fragile, hard to name, glinting briefly with gratitude. Dean scoffed, tossing a few crumpled bills onto the counter like they were payment for his own disappointment. Come on, Laura, he barked, turning on his heel. Laura lingered for a beat, her eyes slowly meeting Naomi's. And in that brief glance there was something, regret maybe, or understanding. Then she followed Dean, the door closing behind them with a soft chime, leaving behind a sudden gust of cold air that swept through the heart of the diner. The door slammed shut behind the two officers, the bell giving a dry metallic clang. The diner sank into an uneasy silence. Naomi lowered her head and pretended to wipe the counter again, even though its surface was already spotless enough to reflect light. Behind her, whispers bloomed like weeds after a storm, murmurs tinged with fear, judgment, and wariness. The man finished his last sip of coffee. He stood, leaving a $20 bill tucked beneath his cup despite Naomi's refusal. Then he adjusted his jacket and turned to her with a quiet, sincere gaze. My name's Hank Morrison, he said, plain and direct. Naomi nodded, offering a smile, this time a real one, unforced. I'm Naomi Carter. Safe travels, Mr. Morrison. Hank gave a small nod, heavy with unspoken meaning, then stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun, now fading into a scorched bronze. Naomi stood there, watching his silhouette disappear, a dull ache blooming in her chest like thorns growing from the inside out. She had no illusions about what was coming. In small towns like Willow Creek, people remember what they don't like, and anger spreads faster than fire when someone crosses an invisible line. And she had just drawn that line in thick, unmistakable ink. The afternoon dragged on, slow and sticky like molasses. A few more customers trickled in. If they smiled at all, the smiles were tight, strained. Most just avoided eye contact. Naomi didn't blame them. When she finally flipped the sign from open to closed, dusk had already crept in. She collapsed onto a booth seat near the counter, slumping forward, burying her face in her hands to block out a day that had been as heavy as it was bitter. She never wanted a confrontation. She didn't need another enemy, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Hank's hand trembling around the cup, the hospital band glinting with quiet desperation. And the memories came rushing back. The days and nights at the Atlanta hospital where strangers had extended small kindnesses to her. At the exact moment she was ready to give up. How long can you ignore someone else's pain when you've known what it feels like to drown in your own? She knew she couldn't have done anything differently, even if it cost her everything. As Naomi locked up for the night, she noticed something taped to the front window. A jagged piece of cardboard scrawled in angry red letters that looked like they'd been written in blood. No biker lovers, no troublemakers allowed. Her stomach twisted. She ripped the sign down and crushed it in her hand. But the words had already etched themselves into her memory. Trouble had officially arrived at Carter's diner, and Naomi knew this was only the beginning. Yet in the midst of the fear trying to drown her, something inside her chest sparked. Not rage, but resolve. She hadn't backed down today, and she wouldn't back down tomorrow. That night, after the last light in the diner flickered off, Naomi walked the quiet halls of Willow Creek Hospital. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting cold green reflections on the gray tile floor, while the sharp smell of antiseptic clung to the air like a memory that wouldn't let go. Naomi paused at room 214. Her fingers grazed the doorframe before she slowly pushed the door open. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a heart monitor. The steady beep, beep, beep echoed gently, like the fragile rhythm of breath clinging to a still body. Her father, Evelyn Carter, lay motionless, eyes closed, his once strong frame now small beneath hospital blankets. Like a dry leaf at the end of winter. Naomi approached, pulled a chair close to the bed, and held his hand, the skin now thin and delicate, stretched over knobby bones. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her presence was a silent vow that no matter who turned their backs, here, beside the man she loved, she would not. His hand was still warm, but it felt like holding a fading memory. "Daddy," Naomi whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "It's me." Her thumb brushed the back of his hand, a gesture he used to soothe her with when she was little, whenever she was sick or crying. "Tonight," she repeated, like a soft call to a soul drifting somewhere between worlds. "I had a rough day at the diner," she said with a tired smile that barely kept the tears at bay. "I think I might have just picked a fight with the police chief. I didn't mean to. But you always told me to speak up when something's wrong. And today a man came in. Big guy, motorcycle rider. Looks like trouble, right?" She paused, throat tightening at the memory of Hank Morrison's eyes. But he wasn't. He was just a dad. His daughter's here, in this very hospital, late-stage cancer. And the way those cops treated him, Daddy, she struggled to swallow. They acted like he wasn't even human. The monitor kept beeping, cold and mechanical, like a song that wouldn't end. But Naomi continued, her voice suddenly steadier, lifted by something deeper than logic or fear. "I don't even know if what I did was right. The diner's already hanging by a thread, and now the whole town is whispering, calling me names I don't even want to repeat. Someone even taped a sign to the door, like I'm some kind of traitor, just for showing kindness to someone who needed to be treated with humanity." Naomi's eyes burned, but she blinked quickly, refusing to cry. "But I remember what you always said. Judge people by what they do, not how they look. Today, that man didn't need judgment. He needed compassion. And I didn't turn away." Naomi leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper like a secret prayer sent deep into the soul of the still figure before her. "I think I scared some people, maybe even myself. But I didn't back down, and I believe you'd be proud of that." She sat there in silence for a long time. Only the soft hiss of the ventilator and the faint green glow of the monitor pulsing with each fragile heartbeat filled the room. Then, like an old habit, Naomi bent down and placed a gentle kiss on the back of her father's hand. "Good night, Daddy. I'll take care of the diner, and I carry your strength right here in my heart." She stood, taking one last look at his peaceful face before turning to leave, carrying with her the full weight of a long day and the quiet strength of the man who'd taught her how to stand tall. The next morning, Naomi arrived at the diner before the sun had even peeked over the trees at the edge of Willow Creek. She unlocked the door, her heart heavy, her stomach twisted, her eyes burning from a sleepless night. That hateful cardboard sign from yesterday. She'd burned it behind the diner, watching the flames lick away every blood-red word like they were trying to scorch the shame others tried to force on her. But the town's silence, it weighed more than any insult. There was no Mrs. Worthington, no truck drivers, not even the two old men who played chess every Thursday morning. By 9 o'clock, the coffee pot was still full and ice cold. By 10, Naomi had wiped the counter for the 4th time, not because it was dirty, but because she didn't know what else to do. By noon, she stood behind the register staring at the nearly empty tip jar, and in the quiet hum of the empty diner, One question pulsed in her head. How much longer can I hold on before every light in Carter's diner goes dark for good? Then, the bell above the door rang. Naomi looked up, expecting maybe a lost traveler or someone with the wrong delivery. But instead, two strangers stepped into the diner. The man was in his 50s, tall and lean, with sun-worn skin and a face lined with years on the road. His jeans were faded, jacket frayed at the shoulders, and pinned to his chest was a small silver skull, a subtle but unmistakable emblem of the Grim Reapers. Beside him was a woman of similar age, long gray hair braided neatly over one shoulder. She wore a denim jacket patched with the same insignia, but her eyes were kind, and her smile was soft as morning mist. "You Naomi Carter?" the man asked. Naomi nodded, cautious. A ripple of tension curled down her spine. "I'm Roy Morrison," he said. "This is my wife, Linda. My brother is Hank." At that name, Naomi's shoulders eased. She stepped out from behind the counter and shook their hands. The grip was firm, warm, respectful, as though a silent thread of gratitude connected them. "Hank told us what happened yesterday," Linda said. "He wanted to come thank you himself, but he's still at the hospital with Jessie." Naomi smiled gently, her expression softening. "How's she doing?" Roy's face fell slightly. "Stage 4. They're trying a new treatment. It's the last shot." Naomi's throat tightened, her chest aching. "I'm really so sorry," she said softly. Linda placed her hand gently over Naomi's. "He told us how kind you were to him when no one else would be, that you stood up to the police. You didn't look at the patch, you saw the person." Naomi gave a small shrug. "He didn't need a fight. He needed a meal." Roy smiled, something deep flickering in his eyes. "Sometimes those two things are more alike than you'd think." Naomi offered them coffee, and they accepted. She poured slowly, careful not to let her hands shake, and in the warm scent of fresh coffee rising between them, something strange filled the air, like the stillness right before a summer storm breaks. When they finished their cups, Roy set his down and looked at her with calm seriousness. "We'd like to do something to thank you." Naomi tilted her head, unsure. "What do you mean? Thank me how?" "Not money. Don't worry," Roy said. "Support." Before she could ask what that meant, he smiled again, a smile that told her to wait and see. And then it began. At first, it was just a sound, a low rumble like distant thunder rolling in from the horizon. Then more. Closer. Louder. Naomi hurried to the window, her gaze freezing mid-motion. From both ends of Main Street, the skyline shimmered with metal, a procession of motorcycles rolling in, sunlight glinting off polished chrome like waves of silver. Not just a few. Hundreds. The roar of engines filled the street like an army on the move. Men and women, young and old, all dressed in jackets, helmets, and patches bearing the Grim Reaper's insignia from chapters across the state. Some carried flags. Others held small bouquets of flowers. They had all come for one reason. The thunderous sound echoed off the buildings, shaking the narrow street outside Carter's diner. Then, one by one, engines cut off. Riders dismounted and moved quietly, deliberately, no shouting, no spectacle, just a silent march, like a flock of migratory birds returning to a sacred place. Naomi stood frozen, stunned by the sight before her. The parking lot packed, sidewalks filled with hundreds of dusty boots. Faces she didn't recognize, solemn but not menacing, all making their way toward Carter's diner like it was a sanctuary for something far greater than breakfast. She turned to Roy, her voice barely more than a breath. "What is this?" Linda smiled gently, just as she had since the moment she walked in. "Hank told them what you did. Then his chapter told the others. In our world, word travels fast. You treated one of us like a person. That means more than you know." Naomi struggled for words, "But that's over 200 people." Roy looked at her with steady conviction. "Because when the world turns its back on us, we remember who didn't." The bell above the door chimed, but this time it didn't feel casual. It felt sacred. The first bikers entered. They weren't loud, didn't swagger. They simply nodded at Naomi as if she were the keeper of a place worth revering. They found seats, squeezed onto crowded benches, leaned against the walls where chairs had run out. Naomi stammered, I don't have enough food for everyone. Roy squinted playfully, his eyes twinkling. Already handled. Linda added, I called your suppliers last night, deliveries on the way, paid in full. Naomi blinked, overwhelmed. By who? Linda gave her a warm look. By us. Think of it as an investment in kindness. Outside, townsfolk began to gather. They stood across the street, peeking from porches, behind curtains. But they didn't retreat. They watched, curious. And then, as if some invisible wind had blown away the line drawn by fear, they started to cross, carefully, hesitantly. But step by step they came closer. Moloch, Naomi's old classmate, was the first. He walked into the diner, looked around at the sea of leather and chrome, and broke into a sheepish grin. You still got those butter cookies? He asked, half joking, half hopeful. Naomi blinked, then laughed, her voice cracking free from a shell of tension. Oh, well then, looks like I'm grabbing a seat, he said, casually sliding in next to a woman with bright pink hair, a leather cap, and a jacket that read, Reapers Never Quit. And soon others followed. Conversations began, at first quiet, uncertain, but then came the laughter, the clink of cups, the murmured thank yous, rising between people who had once stood on opposite sides of a wall built from fear and assumptions. Naomi stood and watched, her chest alight, not just with joy that the diner was full again, but with hope, with change, with the quiet realization that Carter's diner, once threatened by a sign full of hate, had become a crossroads of empathy and understanding. And then the bell rang again. Naomi turned. Her heart skipped. Hank Morrison stood in the doorway. His face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, his jacket still coated in highway dust. But on his lips was a smile, soft as a breeze, honest as earth. You don't mind, do you? He asked, his voice low as before, but now there was something warm in every word. I brought a few friends. Naomi stepped forward, eyes red-rimmed. She met him in the middle of a room now packed wall to wall. Not at all, she replied, her voice catching with emotion. I've been saving you a seat. That afternoon the sun cast a golden light over Willow Creek, soft, forgiving, and full of grace. Carter's diner rang with voices, laughter, the hiss of the coffee machine, the clink of silverware, as if the place had never known silence. But truthfully, maybe it was the first day the diner had truly come alive, fully and freely. Naomi moved like a whirlwind behind the counter, pouring coffee, shouting orders to the kitchen, sliding plates of burgers and fries toward waiting tables. The diner was packed, humming with such life that not a second felt wasted. Just as Roy had promised, the supply trucks had arrived. Stacks of fresh eggs, bacon, bread, and coffee beans piled high outside the kitchen door. But the real magic? The bikers. Big, rough, intimidating at a glance, had unloaded every box themselves. No one asked them to, no one had to. They laughed and joked as they did it, like it was just another part of the gathering. Naomi had called in a few friends to help, a couple of teens from the church youth group, a few neighbors she wasn't even sure liked her. But no one hesitated, not one, because something was different in the air today. A quiet understanding, as if everyone knew they were witnessing something bigger. A moment of change born from a single act of kindness. Every table was full. Leather-clad bikers with weathered faces and calloused hands laughed, swapped road stories, and chatted with curious townspeople. Mrs. Worthington, who had clutched her pearls in fear the day before, was now deep in conversation with a burly woman whose arms looked like they could bend steel, yet whose voice bubbled with excitement as she described linen embroidery techniques. In one corner, Moloch was teaching a group of bikers how to play dominoes, slapping the tiles on the table with dramatic flair that had the whole group in stitches. Even Deputy Laura Miles had quietly slipped in. She sat at the counter, accepted a cup of coffee from Naomi, and gave a small nod. She didn't need to say anything. Her eyes said it all. "I understand, and thank you." Naomi leaned against the kitchen doorway and took a deep breath. She looked around and realized this was what her father had dreamed of when he opened Carter's Diner, a place where no one cared what color your skin was, what patch you wore, what job you held, or what mistakes you carried. All that mattered was a warm meal, a shared roof, and a heart that still welcomed others. The doorbell chimed again, and this time conversation softened. A man walked in. For a moment, the room paused. He was tall, built like a cliffside. White beard, thick and full, black leather jacket stretched across broad shoulders, covered in large, bold patches. Stitched across the chest, President, Grim Reapers, MC, Riverside, Chapter. Naomi wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward instinctively. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the feeling that this would be a moment she'd never forget. The man smiled warmly and extended a hand. "You must be Naomi," he said, his voice like gravel smoothed by sunset. "I'm Marcus Turner." Naomi shook his hand, firm and sure, just the way her father taught her. "Welcome to Carter's, Marcus." He chuckled softly. "You've made quite an impression on the whole family." Then Marcus turned to face the room and raised one hand. With just that small gesture, the diner fell quiet as if by magic. Every eye turned toward him, not out of fear, but from pure respect. Marcus cleared his throat. His voice rang out, clear and deep, like a church bell on Sunday morning. "I want to take a moment to thank Miss Naomi Carter here." He tilted his head, looking at her with quiet sincerity. Whenever others turned their backs, she didn't. When people saw just the patch on a man's back, she saw the father beneath it. Heads nodded across the room. A soft wave of murmured agreement swept through the crowd. "And in our world," Marcus continued, "loyalty and respect, they're not just words, they're everything. So today I want to make something clear. From this day forward," Marcus declared, voice firm as stone, "Carter's Diner is under the protection of the Hells Angels." The diner erupted. Cheers, boots stomping the floor, fists pounding tables like thunder. The windows rattled under the weight of joy unleashed. Naomi stood frozen, overwhelmed, her eyes burning with emotion. She looked across the room, to where Hank stood near the back, his gaze gentle, a faint smile on his lips. Proud, honest, Naomi smiled back, a trembling smile, almost too stunned to believe it was all real. But Marcus wasn't finished. He waited for the noise to die down, then turned again, his gaze sharp, his voice steady and deep. "If anyone in this town has a problem with that, then they've got a problem with all of us." There was no threat in his words, just a simple, stone-solid truth. Marcus turned his head, eyes landing on Deputy Laura Miles, who sat stiffly at the counter, her coffee cooling in her hands. She swallowed hard, then slowly nodded. A careful, deliberate nod filled with acknowledgement. Satisfied, Marcus turned back to Naomi. "And now," he said, flashing a wide grin, his gold tooth catching the light, "who's ready for some pie? I hear this place makes the best three-berry slice in the state." Laughter erupted again, like sunshine breaking through morning mist. Just like that, the tension melted away. Naomi laughed too, wiping her eyes with the edge of her apron, then turned and rushed to the kitchen, slicing apple, cherry, and chocolate pies. Her hands still trembling slightly, but her heart light and full. That night, the buzz of celebration spilled out onto the street. Someone hooked up a small speaker to a bike battery, and classic rock drifted into the summer night. Kids zipped by on bicycles, weaving between the giant motorcycles like minnows among steel coral reefs. Elderly couples leaned against lampposts, chatting with men and women in leather jackets. People who had traveled through countless towns, lived 100 lives, but whose hearts now beat in rhythm with this place. And then a small miracle happened. Naomi's father, Evelyn Carter, who hadn't left the house in months, appeared. Wrapped in a thin blanket, he was pushed in a wheelchair by a young biker with a gentle smile and steady hands. No one spoke, Some took off their hats, others stepped aside. The entire night seemed to pause for a breath. This wasn't just a good day, it was a day the town would never forget. And at the heart of it all, standing in Carter's diner, wearing old shoes, an apron stained with coffee, hair damp with sweat, was Naomi Carter. She was still tired, still unsure of what tomorrow might bring. But for the first time in a long, long time, she felt a flame of hope burning in her chest. Fierce, steady, unshakable. She saw Hank on the front steps, talking with Roy and Linda. He still looked worn, but his smile was real. Dangling from Hank's wrist was his hospital ban, the name Jesse printed clearly like a fragile promise. Naomi stepped closer. "Hey," she said softly. Hank turned to her, his eyes lighting up. "Jesse," he said, his voice catching, "the doctors said there's been progress, just the first signs, but it looks like the treatment might be working." Naomi stopped in her tracks, breath catching in her throat. A wave of relief rushed through her like sunlight after a storm. "That's incredible," she whispered. And without thinking, she wrapped him in a hug. Hank stiffened for just a second, then returned the hug. Strong, warm, like the way her father used to hold her. When they pulled apart, Hank's voice was hoarse. "She wants to meet you," Jesse said. "You're the kind of woman she hopes to grow up to be." Naomi blinked rapidly, holding back tears. I'd love to meet her," she said. "I really would." The sun dipped behind the weathered rooftops of Willow Creek, leaving streaks of lavender and pale gold in the sky. The last motorcycles revved and rolled down the road, the scent of oil and laughter lingering in the breeze. Naomi stood on the front steps of Carter's diner, arms crossed, apron askew, eyes following the taillights as they disappeared into the dust. Behind her, the clink of dishes and the shuffle of stacked chairs echoed softly after a long, full day. But on that doorstep, between sunset and nightfall, everything felt still, like a moment of magic caught in time. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The scent of fresh pie, worn leather, and sun-baked dust swirled together. A strange perfume. Is the scent of hope? A quiet cough behind her made her turn around. Roy and Linda stood there, hand in hand, warm smiles blooming on faces etched with time. In Roy's hands was a thick brown paper package, its edges a little worn. He stepped forward and held it out to her. "From all of us," he said simply. Naomi's eyes widened as she took the gift, carefully peeling back the layers of paper as if unwrapping something sacred. Inside was a soft black leather jacket, folded with surprising precision. On the back, embroidered in bold stitching that made Naomi's throat tighten, were the words "Carter's Diner," framed by a curved patch that read "Friend of the Reapers," and just beneath it, a smaller patch stitched with a single word, "Protective." Naomi's fingers traced the thread, her throat constricting, speechless. She had never received anything so simple, and yet so monumental. Roy gave her shoulder a light pat, his hand steady like a lighthouse in a storm. He stood up when it mattered. Most people don't. Linda's smile shimmered through misty eyes. "We never forget kindness. Not ever." In the inner pocket of the jacket there was a small slip of paper, handwritten in shaky, familiar scrawl. Naomi recognized it instantly. It was from Hank. "Thank you for seeing the person, not the patch." Jesse smiled again. "She's excited to meet you, Hank." Naomi pressed the note to her chest, as if anchoring herself against the storm of feeling rising inside her. She brought the jacket inside and chose a place of honor to hang it, right next to her father's old apron and a faded family photo. Two symbols, past and future, struggle and hope, now stood side by side, under one roof. The doorbell chimed again. Naomi turned. It was Dean Harper, the police chief, standing awkwardly at the entrance, hat in hand, his stiff uniform stark against the relaxed, warm atmosphere that now filled the diner. He walked up slowly, cleared his throat. "Coffee?" Naomi asked, her voice even, offering no ground, no apology. Dean nodded. "Please." He poured a cup and slid it across the counter without ceremony. Dean accepted it with both hands like he was holding something fragile and didn't know how to begin. Eventually, he gave a small nod. Busy day. Naomi smiled softly, just enough to say everything that didn't need words. She didn't need to win. She just needed to stand. Dean stared into his coffee, eyes distant. "This town's changing," he murmured. Naomi said nothing. She slung the dish towel over her shoulder and went back to wiping down the counter, leaving Dean to sit in silence, sipping his coffee in the fading light of dusk. The days that followed unfolded like a melody Naomi thought she'd forgotten. Carter's Diner stayed full. Locals, travelers, and every now and then a biker or two. Always respectful, always paid in cash, always tipping so generously that Naomi had to get a second jar just to hold it all. Word spread like wildfire about the little diner with a big heart. And slowly, the frozen walls around Willow Creek began to thaw. If you believe in kindness, leave a like. If you've ever stood up for what's right, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. So every day starts with a story that matters. Cup of coffee, a shared moment, a single click. Sometimes that's all it takes to begin something good. Hit like and subscribe if you believe compassion can change the world, one story at a time. You don't need to be a hero, just someone willing to open your heart. Subscribe and walk with us through stories that reach the soul.